approaching that time of the year, you know, the start of term 2 or early in term 2, when the monologue exams for 2021 will be published. And it just seems like we've just been watching the most fantastic top class performances from last year's wonderful students, and those questions kind of come up. How do you get your students to be so well prepared in this process, which is really quite it's been a really interesting one for me as a teacher. I'm a music teacher by training, but in my role in the performing arts, as performing arts curriculum manager, I've come to learn a lot more about theatre studies and drama solos and dance and the other parts of my portfolio, and coming to understand the theatre the monologue exam really follows on from the curriculum. It's obviously part of the curriculum, and it is there to examine students in, you know, the key knowledge and key skills, but it comes as such an exciting package. And I'd really like to start with that package that you see published early in term 2. Emily, what do you do as a theatre studies teacher? What happens once that's...
So I'll just sort of talk through what I do when I get my list. So we usually get the list from the VCAA, and then we can contact Marg usually to get a version of the script that has actually the full monologues in it. So we can get the package that has it there, instead of just trying to track down all the scripts and then trying to pull all the monologues out yourself. I then usually get a pack for each of the students so that we can go through and start pulling them apart. I never let the kids pick a monologue before we've looked at all of them. And undoubtedly they get it in, I think it's April, May, I think, when they're released, if that's right, Mark. And I will mention it, but I will not pull it out until towards the end of term 2, because otherwise whatever we're doing just gets pushed to the wayside. So
many people are busy with their ensemble performances and things at this time of the year anyway. So
exactly.
Yeah.
So we get that. So when we do start working on it, I usually spend 2 to 3 weeks workshopping each monologue. So we, over that period of time, we usually start, I allocate different monologues to different people in the class. If you've got a smaller class, 2 to a person or whatever it may be, or if you've got a larger group, we can do them in groups. And I get them to go and try and do as much dramaturgy on it as they can. So just spend a double period or 2 double periods seeing what they can find about these monologues and about these scripts and about the plot or the characters or examples or photos, anything they can find. And then they come back and they can present it to each other. So we do a little bit of a show and tell. And that means by the end of that time, everyone knows a little bit about each of the monologues. Then after that, we do actual workshops as well. So I'll take, maybe if there's 2 in the same style, we might look at 2 different ones. Or as we know, often in a monologue, in the pack, you'll get 2 monologues from the same show, or you might get 2 Shakespeares from the same, or whatever it may be. There's often pairs in a male and female role. So we'll look at both of those and think about the context. We might have a go at playing with those monologues. We might try and apply different styles on top of that, so we can look at how you would recontextualize something like that. We go really silly and, add in something ridiculous, like do it like you're a toddler, or all and just play with them as much as they can. Because I think it's really, I'm very wary of letting them just pick something they know or something that's familiar. I find that some of the best discoveries come from diving into something that's really interesting or intriguing to them, that they can really dig their teeth into. Because you're going to stay with this monologue for months and months, so they have to love it from the beginning, or at least be interested enough there where they really want to unpack it. So we do all that. We spend a bit of time workshopping those monologues, and that usually takes us to the end of first semester, or end of second term, even though first semester finishes a little bit earlier than that. And then over the holidays, I tell them, you pick. So over the holidays, they then, with that information in their mind with as much advice and as much intel as they have, that they can pick from that and make an informed decision. I also get them obviously to play to their strengths and things as well. So if they're naturally inclined to, if they've been the star of your musical for 6 years or something, you could talk to them about the possibilities of using that strength to their performance and do a music theatre one. But giving them all that scope and getting them to look at all of them in different ways, it maybe makes those students think, oh, okay, that's not the only option for me. That sounds really cool. So that's kind of where we get to before they start the process, is just getting that pack sorted.
Do you find that students will want to do the same one, and does that matter if you've got students in the class doing the same one?
I found that with doing it that way, I don't have I've never had a class where all the girls want to do the same one, or there's a big pile up. They naturally tend to disperse themselves, which is a weird thing. I don't know if that's common everywhere, but we end up with, a variety. We've had probably the most in my class number-wise was 18, and I think we had 3 people doing the same one, and that was it. So everyone else did different ones. One year we had, I think, one person doing at least one of every monologue.
Wow.
So so it's a bit of work for a teacher, but it's really nice because you can pair up the ones that are doing in the same style, the ones that are doing the same monologue. I often get them to give each other notes, or if they're doing something really different, I try and keep them apart. So it's really up to how you want to sort of work with them. If you do get the ones that are in the same monologue, it can be a good tool for you too, because you can get them to watch each other and give feedback, and it also gives them sort of thoughts about different ways to approach it.
So how do you then manage that development of it as they're going through the process? How do you keep them on track? And
So,
what is track?
Well, that's the tricky one, isn't it? I suppose as long as you get it done by the date, but that's pushing it a bit hard. But the way that I keep them sort of focused, and the best way to keep them on track is, so we have obviously double periods. I don't know how everyone works, but we have 2 double periods with them a week and a single. So for a double period, I'll spend maybe a period doing workshops. So we might do some character development, or one week might be one of the things I look at. So I'm really into creating the world of the play, and try and focus on that as being a really key aspect of this monologue, because one of the key aspects is that you have to not only look at the monologue in its moment, but you have to look at the scene, and you have to look at the whole play. So a really good way to think of that is to really think about the world of the play that this exists in. So we do entrances. So where in the space are you? Is this a room? Have you got a door? We also do stage business. So we do get them to do like 2 minutes. It's me, I'm saying we. I get them to do, say, 2 minutes of stage business that leads up to the start of their monologue. And if there's something that's happened just before that, how they would react to that. Or it could be acting out the bit that happens before that, just in mime. Or if it's the start of the play, they might have to think about beyond that and make up what they think might have happened just before that. So it's really creating this idea of a world, not just this insular monologue, because that's where you get trapped, I think, and you don't think broadly enough. So by creating this, so we do all kinds of workshops. So world of the play, we do entrance and exits, we do some character development, looking at physicalization, we do greetings. So anything to get them basically inhabiting their character and the world that they live in. And I use viewpoints a bit for that as well, just to sort of get them moving around the space. If you haven't heard of viewpoints, check it out. It's a really great ensemble activity and an ensemble technique that I use. And I just try and do as much of that as I can that first part. And then for the second part, I let them work. And all I do is pop around to them. So I give them a bit of time. If someone looks like they're sitting still for too long, I play devil's advocate. That's my job. As far as I see, my job is to go and ask them questions as much as I can. So everything has to have a reason. If you're doing some wild interpretation, it's my job to say, okay, explain how that works in the scene, in the play. How does it work? how does that thing work? How does that thing work? And just keep probing, because if they don't have the answer, then it's not viable. So that's what I do to keep them on track, is just question all the time. So much so that I'm a bit annoying and they kind of get wary when I turn up, get close to them. It's like, I'm not ready. But yeah, just asking them to validate every choice they're making.
With those choices, there are obviously choices of even production area. Have they chosen? Are they actor director? Are they choosing other production areas? How do you explore that for a start?
So as far as them selecting the area, yeah. So we discuss it probably a bit early in the year, people who are looking at one or the other, because it often puts itself forward, the choices they might make in Unit 3, where they might be more, a tech kid, or they've had a really interesting time developing some designs during that period, and now they've decided they don't want to act, they want to design. So we talk a bit about it, and as part of those initial workshops, I try and, when we're still looking at the monologues, I try and do at least 2 or so that look purely at design. So I might get them to grab a whole bunch of costume ideas and pitch it to us, or create a setting, or some soundscapes, whatever it may be. So again, those students who maybe were thinking or maybe on the fence could have the opportunity to choose. And often when they're looking at something, they might not be really inspired by performing it, but they might have this great idea. And I think, again, I don't like to try and push the acting kids away from design if that's what they have found a passion in for that moment, because they've got to sit with this for so long. If they've got this great idea, I'd rather that they run with something that they're going to be able to develop and really love working with. So there's a few ways you can kind of work with it.
With those who are acting and directing, are they, at what point do they start becoming sort of prescriptive about what they're going to, what's their set, and what's their, where are they, what are they going to need, and what are they going to wear, and all of those kind of associated things? How does that develop? And do you have advice for that?
Yeah, I try and get them to do over the holidays and that break where they're picking, also to start thinking about dramaturgy, because that is really what is going to develop those choices, whether they're going to recontextualize or whether they're going to keep it true to the style or the era. It's just how they can think about, all the things that go into that. So over that time, when they're thinking about which monologue they want to choose, I get them to do a little bit of initial ideas. So they might come back with, I want to stick it in the original time, and I think I might like a costume like this. And if they haven't quite got there when we get back from term, I'm not crying in my room. Like, if there's time, we've got time. So if they come back and they're just really confused, we'll talk through it. But over the first couple of weeks, I would expect them to have some kind of idea about what they want to wear or what they want on the stage, because especially with the objects on the stage, like props or set pieces, they need to start working with slave props so they can get used to having something in their hand. If they're going to, do a scene where they brush their hair and they don't have a brush until the week before, that's going to be hard to rehearse, right? Same with if they've got a costume that has a great big skirt or, butterfly wings, or I don't know, whatever it may be, they need to start practicing with that. Same with shoes. If they're going to wear really tall shoes or something that's a bit hard to walk in, the more they can practice in that type of outfit or those type of equipment, the better it will be. So a couple of weeks in, I'd like to see something happening. And that's where we start having discussions about where we get those things, and what we have here and what we need to maybe outsource as well.
Right. And the package of material that comes, the exam itself, the published examination, comes with, quite a few pages at the start of sort of rules and regulations and so on. Where do you deal with those, or how do you deal with those with your students?
we go through all the criterion together and we read them out and unpack them is the main thing. Some of them are really simple and you go, yep, that makes sense. But things like, you know, the fact that you can't use real weapons or imitation weapons of any kind, things like that, we want to make clear right from the beginning. So some of the things I'll pick out as something to really unpack and look at options around those things. And also there's some really crucial other wording sections in there that are important to getting those good marks, because some of the things, if you don't do them, it's that cuts your mark a lot. So we read through it together and unpack the things that are maybe a little contentious or a little bit more confusing. But some of them are quite, you know, common sense, but we do read all of them with them as soon as we introduce the monologues. So that's actually the first thing I do before even unpacking the actual monologues, is we start with that first page.
So that they're aware. And I think, you know, that's probably, from my perspective, a good thing for teachers to remember too. If you have been doing it for a while, you know, read it again. And if you haven't done it, or if you're very new to the process, also make sure that you do have a good look at those pieces of advice. And of course, the assessment criteria, I think, are published alongside those things too. And that's always important to look at. And if you have a look at the key knowledge and key skills for the outcome, that can be quite instructive too. I don't know if you have anything to say about that, Emily?
Well, it just made me think while you were talking, Mark, that a lot of us who have been teaching for a long time, this subject particularly, we might know the criteria quite well, but A, it changes every few years, and it's changed not that long ago, including a lot of terminology and a lot of things like that. And B, the students don't know that stuff. So even if you know it, I always go to the actual text and the actual criterion that's written in the study design, because I want to make sure that my students are getting exactly what they need to get a good grade. And I can't trust my brain to remember that exactly. So even if I've been through it, you know, for 6 or 7 years, I'm always going to use the terminology that's used and use it exactly and put up on the screen and read through it exactly, so they're getting all of that straight from VCAA.
Yeah, that's really good advice, because I know that you know, that there are things, you know, people hand down notes and advice and things over a number of years, and you know, sometimes, you know, production areas it is now, but you know, roles. There are you know, there are some terminology in the current study design that wasn't there before, and it's useful to be using that not just in preparing for the monologue and for that sort of thing, but it's also terminology. And I think this happens with all performing arts studies, really, that everything that's in the study design actually supports each other. And so it goes to the written exam as well, and to a whole lot of other parts of the study. So being consistent in all of those things is a good thing to do. But getting your students ready for your performance, how do you get them performance ready?
So we've got a couple of ways we do it. I get them to perform sections all the way through. So every week, sometimes every 2 weeks, depending how mean I'm feeling. At least once during that week, they have to perform whatever they've done, a chunk of it. Or it could be that we've done a workshop on entrances or something, and they're going to then show us how they've cut that entrance down to fit at the beginning of their monologue and perform the first 30 seconds. But it's constantly being performance, like performing for their peers, performing for me. I'll get them to pair up and perform, so as often as possible. And then we also have like a showcase night or like a performance night, which is usually at the end of term 3, because then it means it forces them to be ready before their exam. So they've then got the holidays. So if they give us a reasonable performance, we then have all the holidays and sometimes a bit of time when we get back, but you might be the first day back term 3, term 4, hearing everyone. So you've got to be ready. So by making them ready beforehand and giving them a performance date, then you're forcing them to be ready before they need to be. So there's the time to clean it up, because inevitably you don't get a perfect performance then, but you get a one where they're really scared and they're feeling, judged and pressured and all the things that they will feel as being assessed, because it is a nerve-wracking experience, but it's with their peers and their families. And we get each of the class as well we do a peer review where we look at the criterion and they have to mark the criterion for their peers. So we end up with, if we've got 10 kids in the class, everyone gets 9 marking sheets with comments. So we do that as well, which gets them a bit more ready and just gets them to think about it. And I write notes as well and give them a bit of feedback. Sometimes my colleagues do as well, and they'll come in and again write as a sort of mock assessor, I guess. I know other schools do where they will share their cohorts and show each other as well. We haven't done that yet because we've had quite big groups.
It's kind of a different experience, isn't it, when you're doing it for the examination kind of condition, go into a room and have the assessors sort of sitting at a table in front of you and not having applause at the end. It's a kind of a different atmosphere as far as how you manage that, and even to the practicalities of getting everything in the time and then being ready with your interpretation statement as well. That exam room kind of technique, that's a slightly different thing than performing in front of your peers and your family. How do you manage that?
We also do a bit, so I give a bit of extra time, usually on the holidays as well. We book in a couple of days at school where I give the students 1 hour of uninterrupted time, where it's just me working with them intensively while everyone else is sort of around working in other rooms or wherever. And as part of that, I get them to perform it multiple times and I sit as an assessor. So I don't clap for them ever in that hour. Usually I'll stop and start and work with them, and then at the end, or even at the start and the end, usually both, so one at the start and one at the end, I get them to do the whole thing without being interrupted. And I write and things like that. And I think that gives them a bit of experience, because often they say they feel more nervous in front of their family and me because we know them.
Yeah.
And they know that I'm really hard and really quite particular about making sure that they're covering all the criterion and things like that. And also that I'm going to ask them questions about every decision they've made. So I think they're always a bit nervous that they won't be able to answer or something like that. So we give them that sort of experience, which tends to prepare them a little bit for that assessor moment. We also tend to try and take them to the space just to look at it, so that they can get a little bit familiar with what it looks like. You can tend, a lot of the places will let you book in just a little tour, just to have a look at the space once you know where you're going to be.
I think it's probably the case that you're not there might be a couple of rooms being used and you get assigned to one of those particular rooms. So I guess being ready to move whatever it is in whatever circumstances are at the venue are probably important as well. Can you fit in the doorway? Can you? Is it something that the student can manage on their own and set up in the time? Those kind of things start to become, like quite important considerations. Not so, for the well-being of the student and for feeling settled and able to perform their best, I would imagine, because you don't want that kind of panic.
No, and they're 12, 2-meter set might fit through your big stage doors at the school, but maybe they don't fit through the normal door,
just a normal door.
The hall that you're performing at or wherever it is, so and I find that it's really important to sort of figure out measurements and things like that, and because if you can you want to make them feel as comfortable as possible. Yes, we're trying to put them under that forced pressure to kind of give them an idea what it might feel like, but also we don't want them to be completely terrified. So we want to try and support them to be prepared. You know, that's why we do it. It's not because we want them to feel horrible. We want them to feel prepared. So,
and being prepared with that 5x5 space as well, having that marked out, and
yeah, absolutely,
being able to work in, you know, with that space that you have. I suppose how important is that to use all of that space?
Yeah, I think it's really important because we mark it out in just in masking tape or something like that, or if we don't have masking tape at the time, we use shoes or chairs or whatever. But especially if you're using this space, because if you're you know, if you don't know your space, I think 5x5 sometimes sounds a bit small, but when you actually mark it out, it's quite a big space. And if students think there's a small space, they act smaller, and they won't, you know, use the whole room. They won't express as big. They won't, you know, project their voice as much. All those things. So by having it marked out, it also makes them think about their floor pattern, which is something we talk about quite a bit. I know that a few of mine, I say, oh, you're stuck on a track because they're just going back and forward like this. So by having it marked out and going, oh, there's actually depth, like you can go backwards, you can go forwards, you don't have to just go like this the whole time. So it does, by having the space marked, I think it's great because it actually gives them a physical representation of, oh, okay, I can, you know, use all the space that's here and think of it creatively, because it can get a bit dull if you're just standing in the middle of the space, if they're standing in the middle of space performing and going a bit this way and a bit that way. So yeah, it gives them that 3D idea as well.
An interpretation statement, getting that ready, at what stage do you expect that to be ready?
I try to get a draft from them partway through term 3, usually earlier rather than later, but inevitably it always gets pushed to the end. So we try and get it done, a rough draft for their showcase night. So as part of their coursework, they have to do a oral presentation. I think it's for outcome 1, task 2. I think it is. Let me check. No, that's the one. Where they're doing oral presentation about the possibilities, intentions, and visions. So I try and sort of group it in together with that task and get them to write as much as they can. So you get the template from VCAA. I think it's at the back of the monologue.
Exam paper, yeah.
The booklet, the pack. And it has a lot of examples of the types of things you can include in your interpretation statement. So I say to them, write something for everything. Okay, something might be really simple or short, but write something for everything, because what will happen is the things that are really crucial will pop out to you, and you'll go, oh, there's that I've spent a lot of work on that thing and making it really interesting and really cool. That will be one of my key things. So you'll find a bunch of gems in there, and then throw away the things that are really pointless, or, you know, we don't need to know that you wore black shoes because it was appropriate of the era, or, you know, those things. So we do want to know about, you know, this creative, awesome idea you had about a symbol or a color that you used, or the research that went into this item. That's one of the big things for my students, and I think all the students I've had that have got into top class have all had one thing in common, which was that they really looked at the dramaturgy and really went in depth with the research behind their performance and their monologue. So if they were looking at something historically, they dug right in. If they were looking at other examples that inspired them, if they were looking at pop culture references, if they were looking at stylistic choices, or if they were looking at thematic things, they really went further and further they could to try and find justification for those choices. And that comes out of, I think, being that devil's advocate and asking all those questions, because you're making them justify everything. And if they can't justify it, they look for more responses that will help them do that. Or they throw it out because it wasn't strong enough.
I thought that was going to be my very next question, is how do you, you know, what is it about the top class students, you know, that and I think that's probably it, isn't it? You really feel that that they're right inside, you know, they're really inhabiting the character, the play, the era, whatever it happens to be. And, you know, it really, I guess it's arresting when that does happen. It's really very exciting. So any other while we're thinking about other top tips, if anybody does have any questions that they'd like to type into the chat, we've probably got a couple of minutes to deal with some things like that if you would like. So just thinking, well, you know, if anybody has any other questions. But in the meantime, just sort of other top tips, I guess, Emily?
Yeah, so my top ones are the dramaturgy. The other one is finding something you can sit with for a long time. So you have to really love what your monologue, at least for the beginning. And I always say to them, you'll probably hate it by the end because you spent so long with it, but that's okay, because you have to love it in the beginning. Otherwise, you're going to get bored. And something that's interesting to you or has something in there that intrigues you, that you want to research, you want to find more about. Work, just like I think the ones that, again, my students that got into top class worked constantly. We had one last year who, despite the coronavirus and stuff, she was working from home and would constantly send in videos of herself with interpretations, and so that we could look at them and make some comments or so. And, you know, she would perform at least once a day when it was getting towards the end to memorize. So it's making that work really present and really obvious, because that's what they're getting rewarded for. It's their work and it's what they've put into it. You can't fake it.
You can't, can you? And I was saying that in the previous session, that sort of feeling really well prepared, being absolutely, you know, solid in your preparation is probably the best place to be, because that does allow you the opportunity to take that little extra, be able to breathe life into a character without distracting yourself, you know. As a musician, it's the preparation, but it's the noble negligence that allows you to kind of be a bit freer from it, and then, you know, and that does lead to that lovely moment where things all kind of align, and, you know, there's that sort of stillness in the air when you finish, kind of
and always looking for feedback too, like the ones that have been through the last few years are the ones that have always asked, how can I improve, you know. And it's that want to be better, and not to be perfect, but to be better, and wanting to play with different ideas and keep it fresh, keep it interesting. You know, they wanted to keep enjoying it, even though they were feeling like they get to a point maybe where it might feel a bit stale, and you go, okay, well, try it with a focus on motion, or try it with a focus on emphasis, or try it with making sure that your voice is really clearly portraying key moments. So it's just giving them new ways to kind of find more joy and find, you know, more from their monologue. It's the rigor that you have as an actor, that an actor doesn't just get to the point where they think it's done and then they're like, well, I'm done now, I'll perform it. You know, it's always improving. It's the same with being a musician. You don't just stop and go, on it's now.
That's right. Yeah, you stop. We do have a question in the chat, and that's kind of along those lines. How many ideas do you provide to the students, or do you place all of that responsibility on them?
I don't, if it's as far as conceptual for their monologues, if that's where it's going, please let me know in the wrong direction. But I don't really give them my input with that. I'm just a questioner. So they come up with their concepts and then I prod them. So I try not to give them, I don't want to, what's the word? I don't want to interfere with their concept or their ideas and like plant things. I don't want to plant my ideas. Sometimes I'll find something that is really, that they've done, like got a really interesting concept, which I might give them a few ideas about how they could further that. But I try and make sure that the initial things are them, because it's their work they're being graded for. It's not me being a director or me giving them ideas. So
in fact,
yeah,
in fact, some of that comes out of the classwork or the school assessed sort of aspect of the unit, does it?
Yeah, it does, because they're in their outcome 1 and I think outcome 2, I think as well, is really looking at their choices and how they've made choices, how they've used dramaturgy, how they've used the elements of theatre composition, all that stuff. So I can't give them what they deserve if they haven't been doing it. So I try and give them at least, you know, the initial stuff to be them. And then I just try and push them further and further into it. Because I don't want that surface level of like, you know, I want to use red because it's passion. You're like, oh, okay, but how does that how does that relate to your character? Is there some examples from the text you can find that back that up? How could you use that color in more than one way? Or, you know, so it's like then just pushing them with that idea about how they could really use it.
And I guess that helps you to cater for the range of students that you're likely to have in your class, because you will have some that will be more experienced and naturally wanting to be asking all of those questions, and being, you know, and having the ideas already, whereas others will need a little bit more guided questioning to find something to say. How do you deal with the sort of the weaker students or less experienced students?
Well, we're from the inner west, so we have a real variety of lived experiences and also access to arts, you know, for example. So we've got kids that have never been to the theatre before they get to our class, and we've got kids that have grown up in a theatre because their parents are both actors, or, you know, we've got a real range of people that really support public education, but also some who are here because, you know, they're at the bottom end of that poverty line or whatever it may be. So you've got to be able to cater for all of that. So yeah, you've really got to figure out how you can tap into those ideas and help those lower students. And maybe it's by showing more videos or directing them to some examples that might not know, because their knowledge might be a bit more narrow. So there's a lot of sort of scaffolding you have to do to give them that push. But also some of them really, it might be their first year doing theatre studies. It happens. There's no prerequisites to go, unfortunately, into year 12 theatre studies. So you might have to then do a bit of building for them. You can also use those really experienced students who have got lots of stuff to work with them. I like to try and avoid the idea of like, you're all fighting against each other for a spot. It really, the culture that we try and develop here is around supporting each other. And we look at that as part of our safe and ethical work practices, that we encourage them to really support and share and discuss together, so that they're sharing a burden together. The ideas are still their own and they're still working individually, but it means that they can, you know, feed some ideas off someone else that's not me or their mum or their dog. So they've got other people to bounce off. So there's lots of different ways you can scaffold those students without being the only one as well, and ways to sort of expand their ideas.
And that really is modelling the real world of the theatre, isn't it? When you the collaboration that goes across the board in making theatre, staging theatre. I mean, there's nothing more that requires so much interaction and cooperation from others. So it's good to be modelling the real theatre world as well. Yeah. So we've got only a couple more minutes left. If there's any other questions, get them up there quickly. Otherwise, I'm just thinking with how some of the frequently asked questions from my point of view is like on the curriculum end of things, I get questions about the actual, you know, do you have to use the script that's specified? Do you have to follow the stage directions? There's there's quite a few of those things that really are covered in those first couple of pages. If you read them, but you might want to, you know, have another look and ask the question by all means, but have a look and see if you can work that out as well. Things like, can you recontextualize the monologue, for instance? Do you do that much, Emily?
We give it's really the student's choice, but the tricky thing with recontextualization is that you have to make sure that your interpretation fits not only in your monologue, but within the scene and within the play. So it has to translate across the entire thing. If it doesn't work in the entire play, it doesn't work. So you have to really, even though you're designing for a 5x5 space, well lit, all those different things, you still have to think beyond that as far as its context. So they can, yes, recontextualize, and often things like the Shakespeare's and the Greek and things like that really lend themselves to a new spin, but some of them don't. And sometimes students have to be reined in because they have wild ideas, but also sometimes that's brilliant. And then you say, you know, this is, why didn't I think of this? It's amazing. So it's really, again, it's that probing question, devil's advocate. How do I get this to work? And that just reminded me something that I've been asked a few times as well, is that 5x5 space. For designers, one of the hardest things I found that they could get their head around as a designer is that you are designing for a 5x5 space, an actor in that 5x5 space, to be able to manipulate your design in that performance exam. So you're not designing for a arena or a stage. You're designing for that theatre space, which is 5x5 well lit room in assessor's room for a person performing that monologue. So it's not natural. It doesn't, for a designer, to sort of restrict, but that's the circumstances that are applied to this.
Yeah, so it's the same circumstances for everyone.
Exactly.
So that 5x5 space and the actor in designing for the actor within that space is that kind of, the challenge. Yeah.
And that's why it's important for the designer they have to perform a certain amount of lines from the play in their interpretation of their design, because they need to show how this actor would manipulate that thing at that moment in the play. So we need to see how that would work in the space, right? So that, you know, if sound plays, you say the actor presses a button and so you have to make sure it could work for an actor in that space. That's when it's really nice to pair up some designers if they've got the same monologue, and say, could you do that? Do you think that would fit, in this monologue? And then they become the devil's advocate for their peers as well.
The other one that I have had a bit of, like, we can't afford anything much in the way of set, but, like some people seem to have a lot. Does it make a difference? What can we do?
We are in a West low EAS school. We've got lots of tables that came from hard rubbish that I often collect. Hard rubbish is my friend. But we've just started, every now and again we might hire a costume, but often the kids will make them, or we've got quite a lot of stuff that we've gathered over the years, but it never costs very much because we don't have a budget for that. We are poor as far as, most of the arts community. We're a good representation of the arts community, actually. So we do a lot with little, and if they want something crazy and big, that, again, it's that devil's advocate. Why do you need this giant thing? Is there a way you could do it smarter, or could you use it in a different way, or whatever it is? So you don't need them. It's got to be justified. So why do you need a tap that turns on and has real water? You don't. You can mime it. So yeah, it's not necessary. And our students are perfect examples of that, because we just don't have the resources to be able to throw things at them like a more wealthy school might. So it can be done. It's just about being smart with your choices and using lots of black stage chairs.
Fair enough too, and and it does work, and we do see that from our top class performances. Not always, they're not always full of glitz. There's often just the odd box, or the yeah, there's lots of ways around it, so not essential. Look, Emily, I think that we're about out of time now, and Katie's back. And so thank you. It's been great to chat with you. Thank you.
Thanks for having me. Hopefully this will be helpful.
Thank you, Emily, and thank you, Marg, so much for that conversation. That was so enlightening. Got a lot out of it. I even took notes. So thank you. And thank you to the teachers that made the time to come today and have a listen. I know it's a very busy time of year. This will be put up on YouTube later in term 2, so people can revisit it at a later date. I think that's everything. Marg, you did say before, yeah.
Yep. Yeah. Happy to receive any communications from you if you want to, email me questions and so on. One thing about the monologues, check when it is published. Check to see if I don't think that I'll be the person sending the monologue, the copies from the VCAA this year, but my name's in there and my contact details will be in there for any questions about the curriculum and that sort of thing too. So always happy to help if I can, or to find somebody who can. And thanks, Emily, for helping me to understand a bit more about it too.
No worries.
Thanks, everybody. Have a wonderful rest of your evening. I'll see you soon.
Bye-bye.